What's a cookie? We haven't had this conversation since like our first class.
Something to track like default information, like if you visited the webpage.
Yeah, it's a small file that gets stored on the user's machine from the web page. It can do a number of things, but identification or past purchases. Great. Static content versus dynamic content. In a really broad sense, static content is content, that doesn't change. Dynamic content is when I was talking to you guys just recently about incorporating a Twitter feed or a blog post, or the user comes back and there's something new and changed about the web page. Search engines versus directories. We can actually just look at the search engines part on that. I should have crossed out the versus directories or gotten rid of that. So we used to teach that comparison and we don't teach that anymore. But a search engine is created or creates its hits by taking spiders or bots to crawl the web, and indexes these pages. And then when somebody types in a query, it brings back a list of indexed pages in a hierarchy of what it thinks, you want first. Resolution versus color depth. So resolution is the number of pixels. Color depth is the number of colors that I can have in a particular area. Calculation of file size. I don't mean like with a calculator. We're not going to pull out a calculator and say, oh, I've got a file that's, this width by this height and it's saved as this. What file format is it? In the web design concept portion, we're more talking about a broad understanding of, this JPEG is going to be larger than my GIF. Just a sort of a broad understanding of when I'm saving a file type, what would I save it as for, a smaller file or larger file, and the consequence that would have on the amount of time that somebody would spend downloading something. You can also ignore that how to phrase a specific query. I think I'll actually write on one of these pages and rescan it up. Sorry about that. We should be familiar with storyboarding. If we want to go back in time and think about how we storyboard our site and different aspects of the structure of the site, navigation, maybe a breadcrumb trail, a banner, logo, things from phase 1. We should be familiar with layout, like the 2-column fixed header and footer. What do we typically see when we see a page? We typically expect navigation to be here or there. We typically expect a logo to be, for instance, in the top left corner and linked to home. Uniform design applies to this concept that I should know through every page that I'm going to that I'm on the same site, that I'm not, oh, shocking in the design. Maybe I ended up linking somewhere else. Typography, our serif and sans serif, knowing that we want to we should limit the amount of typefaces on a page, generally less than 3 on a particular page of a site. We should know about copyright. We should know that copyright lasts for the life plus 70 years. That we have some exceptions to copyright law. Fair use and public domain. Fair use is when it's a parody or I'm using a small portion for something like nonprofit education. Public domain is when something's in the public domain either because somebody gave up their copyright restriction or because they put it in the public domain to begin with. And copyright is something that is assumed. It doesn't have to be registered or, we just assume that something has a copyright just because it was created. We also should know some of the benefits of publishing in print versus publishing on the web. If we want to rewind, there was actually a little spreadsheet that we filled out much earlier in the semester about that, which I'll flip through at the end. We should know color. We should know RGB, what that stands for and how that's used. We should know CMYK, print publication, what all those stand for. RGB was the red, green, blue. We should know hex color codes and have a broad understanding. I'm not going to ask you, what is the color code for you know, some sort of random fuchsia color or whatever. We should know RGB, black and white. We shouldn't be surprised if we're asked questions like that, what those color codes are. WAI was the Web Accessibility Initiative. And for WAI, we looked at that Section 508 website. And we talked about how that 508 applies to government websites providing services and their requirements to have accessibility features in their website. The international standards is just a variation of WAI. It's just that there are no set laws for accessibility. It's just that the W3C has come up with these tips or guidelines. A top-level domain is the .com, the .edu. Should know that. We should be familiar with what web analytics are, which is basically just taking the reports from our server log and generating statistics on them of user behavior. And then video formats. We should look at our video format sheet. So I'm going to go back through the course documents page and look at some of the handouts we're going to want to look at in this section. Okay, so the web background. This is where we would have talked about what FTP is, which we already needed to know, general components to a web page, that we have, you know, this home page and then individual pages that are linked to them. The top level domain. This was all in chapters 1 and 3 in the yellow book. That was just sort of our review. Topography. I've got a handout on topography. Talk about serif versus sans serif. Contrast, making sure that we have enough distinction between the text and the background for readability. We should avoid excessive formatting, things like underlining. People think underlines are links, so we don't want to just underline text like we might on a printed document. Why we might want to type in text directly versus using text as a graphic. That was in chapter 12 of the yellow book. Let's see. The print versus web. So we actually did this. I don't know if anybody remembered. I'm actually having a hard time remembering this, but I know we did it because I always did this. Talked about where print excels and where web excels in terms of publishing. You know, like for print, I need physical space for all of my archives. On the web, archives are less of an issue because I just need, you know, more file space. I don't need to worry about climate control and, you know, exactly how many papers I've printed and all of that. Customer response, we can get customer response back from a web page really quickly because people can just fill out a form. With print, the customer needs to actually mail something or call us on the phone. Print, we can actually get a lot better colors. We have more colors to choose from. We can get brighter, richer colors with CMYK. So web, we have less colors, but the benefit to web in terms of color was that it's free. We don't have to pay per color we're using. So I would review this. This is all chapter 5 of the yellow book. I would just review where print excels and where the web excels in terms of publishing. Want to look at your copyright resources. This is where we found out about copyright being life plus 70 and there's exemptions to copyright. We had a handout that overviews these. So look at the copyright handout to get that definition, the fair use exemption. Okay. What was this web? I want to see what this was real quick. Oh, no. We've got a web analytics handout. We don't need to know the particular reports. We just need to know that web analytics is a way of looking, you know, taking the server logs, web logs from the server, and looking at them statistically to see the traffic of the site and other user behavior. And then video formats. We should have a broad knowledge. I don't know why I uploaded this one as a doc file instead of a PDF, but we should have a broad knowledge of our video formats. Okay, I'm going to turn